Hi, my name is Jenny Lauren Dowden for Conduit News, and today we're joined with one of our friends, Law Professor Robert Steinbuch from the Bowen School of Law in Little Rock. Thank you for joining us, Professor.
It's always a pleasure to be with you, Jenny, and to be with Conduit.
Well, listen, there seems to be yet again a little bit of controversy surrounding the law school there, most recently with the mishandling of some decisions with your faith. You recently took some days off there to observe the holy days. Tell us what happened.
Sure. It's a difficult environment in general in academia because most academics are not religious, and they're entitled not to be, right? The First Amendment allows you to observe your religion or observe no religion at all, but it's both. And so I've worked here for nearly 2 decades. And every year without exception, I don't work on the high holy days, and I'm Jewish, as you know. And so 2 recent holidays were Rosh Hashanah, that's the Jewish New Year, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Those holy days fell on class days. They don't obviously necessarily have to, but they did this year. And so I did, as I've done for nearly 20 years, I didn't teach, and I had a federal judge come in and teach in my stead. I decided, pursuant to my academic freedom, my good judgment, and my experience, that was the appropriate way to handle my absence. And then to my surprise, the dean wrote me and said, "Oh, I heard you were absent." I'm always afraid when I get those emails about hearing that something occurred. Okay, well, I put that aside, but it's a little eerie. And she said, "Were you sick?" And I said, "Well, no, I took off, as I've always done, for my religious observance." And by the way, Jenny, it would be nice if someone actually knew what the Jewish religious observance was when they're dealing with it. I mean, this is not a complicated Rubik's Cube to figure out. You can find those dates online, and you should be aware that you have Jewish employees who observe the holidays, or at least one who observes those holy days. And so I told her about this, and several days there was silence. And then I was told, well, I've got to fill out a form. Because gosh knows, there's nothing like a good bureaucracy to take care of all important issues. So I've got to fill out a form to get my religious accommodation, the one that I had in practice for 2 decades. Okay, I'll fill out a form. And I said, well, as I've done for the last 20 years or so, just shy, I've taken off for the high holy days, and I intend to continue to do so. And when I do so, I'll do one of 3 things. 1, have a guest lecture, as I've typically done. 2, I run my classes long in any event. So theoretically, I could use up those extra minutes to compensate for the missed class. That would mean that the students wouldn't get anything more. My design, they got something extra, they got a bonus. Or I could schedule a makeup class if I decided to do so. And the dean wrote back and said, well, you can do 2 of the 3, but you can't do the one that you just did, have the guest lecturer, and the one, frankly, that I've most commonly done. Well, as it turns out, our own rules at the Bowen Law School says if it's impracticable to hold class, a law professor can have a guest lecturer. Well, that seems pretty much on point. And so the dean argued that rule with me and said, well, I prefer if you don't do that. Well, good for you. Here's the thing. I've got a lot of preferences. I vote Republican. I prefer that she votes Republican. My guess is she doesn't. So we can have preferences all day long. Question is whether we can impose them on others. Now, I was asked by the law school fairly recently to guest lecture in another faculty member's class, when that faculty member was unavailable. So I did for them, at their request, what they won't allow me to do. Now, the absence of that professor wasn't for religious reasons, but here's the interesting thing about that. That inures to my benefit. Because the First Amendment protects religion. It doesn't protect other reasons that you are, say, absent from work. And so if you allow guest lecturers when a professor is absent for a reason other than religion, then you must, pursuant to the Constitution of the United States, permit it in the religious context. And then this ties into a further interesting fact. My colleague, Josh Silverstein, who's a Democrat, but a moderate Democrat and a reasonable Democrat, and I are both Jewish. We're both senior on the faculty. The class called Constitutional Law currently is being taught by someone who's retired, but holding over an additional year. That's part of a process they do when people retire. And he teaches both the day program and the part-time program class. That's unusual. Typically, we have one professor teach the full-time program class and one professor teach the part-time program class. But for some reason, he's teaching both. Well, this is his last year doing so. And both Josh and I volunteered, given our seniority, to teach that class called Constitutional Law. And we've been turned down. We've been turned down. And the dean said, we're going to hire someone new. So someone inevitably with far less experience, far junior, far less capable. So much so on the latter point that the dean said she would teach another section of constitutional law to help shepherd the new hire through teaching constitutional law, revealing the relative inexperience of the potential new hire. So here you have in-house two professors with seniority. Oh, and we've granted the right of seniority throughout the history at my time here at the school to senior professors to have their choice of an open class. Meaning you can't take a class away from somebody else, but if someone retires, next person in line based on seniority has the opportunity to teach that class. Josh and I are the most senior, and we've both been turned down. This is a problem. This is a problem that we have.
This seems like just partisan politics, big time at play.
Well, it is true that I live in an environment of leftism, but I'm not alone. That's the case across academia. My sister teaches at a major university in Boston. And as you know, Boston holds the most major universities in this country, even more so, I believe, than New York City. Mm-hmm. And of course, she's entitled to take off class time to observe the holy days. And their preference at that school is that she finds a guest lecturer, finds a replacement. That's the far preferred method of addressing the issue. They don't want makeup classes.
Right.
So isn't it interesting that what the major university suggests to do is diametrically opposed to what I'm now, all of a sudden, after 20 years of experience to the contrary, being told that I can't do.
Well, two questions. One, have you ever had to fill out the form before whenever you've taken those days off? And then you would think that they would be elated that you would have not only a guest lecturer, but you would have a federal judge come in to speak to your class. I mean, that seems just like, you know, a great person to come in to have speak on those days off, as opposed to, you know, stretch out a class or reschedule. I mean, you would think that that would be something that they would be, you know, be happy about.
Well, you raise an excellent point, Jimmy, as you always do. And that is, so now we get into the policy discussion, meaning I'm entitled under the rules of the school, under the First Amendment of the US Constitution, to have a guest lecturer. But by the way, is it a good idea? And the answer, as I described with my sister's experience, is yes. It's the better idea. It's the preferred way of handling things. It's what we call best practices. I told my class before this federal judge came in to talk to my class, look, there are three benefits for you to participate in this class. Not that they have a choice, but to be active. That, I guess, they have a choice. And I said, one, you're going to learn something from someone else. So it's going to be a different learning experience. That's always a good thing, to be able to learn from different people with inevitably somewhat different teaching styles. Two, he's a federal judge.
Yeah.
So you're going to have two issues. One is you're going to appear before him in court. Isn't it a great idea to get some exposure to him, see what he's like, and let him know who you are? Let him know how you behave and how you think, so that when you walk into court, he says, "Oh, hello, Miss Smith. I remember meeting you, and I was impressed with you when I taught you in Professor Steinbuch's class." So that's a second benefit. And the third benefit is federal judges hire what are known as judicial clerks, very prestigious positions.
Yeah.
Hey, use this as a quasi interview opportunity. Sell yourself now. Do it now. So the spoils of having this federal judge teaching my class are almost innumerable. They are of significance, and that's why I do it.
Also, the issue that I have with this, we are seeing this from, the Biden administration all the way down to, the local school board. We are seeing issues hammered over and over again: diversity, inclusion, whether it is intended or not. There seems such a lack of awareness from the dean for, to include your religion, and as well as other people on staff. You mentioned another professor who is also Jewish. Whether it is intended to come across as being anti-Semitic or not, or even at the very least inclusive of other people's religion, that's how it appears. How is there such a seemingly lack of awareness for diversity and inclusion in the climate that we are in 2021?
That's exactly right, Ginny. Look, this in our academic environment across this country, there is almost a religion of praying to the diversity gods. Now, I'm perfectly happy to have diversity, but this is the irony, is that while praying to the diversity gods, those who often do so have blinders on. They have a huge blind spot. And this is in the context of where they typically claim unconscious bias. So the existence of such a notion, they claim that there are many people who are unconsciously biased. So if you say, "Oh, I'm not biased," their response is, "That's because you don't know it." So if they come back and say, "Well, I would never be anti-Semitic," well, I guess the same test applies to them. I guess they too are unconsciously biased. I don't know if it's unconscious bias or otherwise, and I have no great desire to decipher that. The outcome is what demonstrates it, right? The law says, regardless of your intentions, you can't give greater availability, greater accommodation to someone for non-religious reasons than you do for religious reasons. And here they've turned that exactly on its head. So whether the motivation is unconscious, whether the motivation is conscious, and notwithstanding that it all is taking place in an obvious environment of at least claims for diversity and inclusion, that's not happening here today. I am not feeling included. My diversity is not being recognized, and the Constitution is being violated.
What would you like to see moving forward?
Well, it's very simple, right? As I said in the beginning of this discussion with you, I wasn't enamored with the notion of going through the bureaucratic process, but I would do it, and I did it. I filled out a form. I said, these are the three methods that for the last 20 years I've used to address when I take off for the holy days, and I would like to continue to do so. So that's the resolution that I asked for from the get-go, and that's a resolution I intend to get. I intend to get it either through the internal process. If not through the internal process, I will next go to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and then to federal court. Because when I take on an issue, and you know this, we've talked about me working with attorney Chris Corbett, who's running for office, as you know. When we take on issues until they are finalized. And that means we take them all the way. Doesn't mean we're going to win. I think I'm going to win on this one because the law is remarkably clear. And included in that, by the way, is my expressed interest and my priority to teach constitutional law. I should be entitled to teach constitutional law. I'm one of the two most senior people at the law school who's requested to do so. And I am entitled to and should be granted the opportunity to have guest lecturers pursuant to the explicit rules of the school when I am absent from class due to my observance of high holy days.
One last question. What advice would you give to professors or students who find themselves in similar situations on university campuses or institutions where they feel like they are in the minority? You know, we are seeing, not that this is a new thing, but we are seeing it's being exposed. Universities are in a sense becoming indoctrination camps where those who have differing views are being silenced or, you know, threatened in a way. What advice would you give to those who are on those campuses in hopes of, you know, speaking out and holding fast and standing firm?
My father was born in Poland before World War II. He and his immediate family fled Poland after the Nazis invaded, not before, after. Both the Nazis and the Russians invaded. He was able to get into the Ukraine, which was also controlled by Russia, and then eventually work his way, then go to Siberia at the demand of the Russians, and then eventually wind up in Kazakhstan during the war. Most of his remaining family was murdered by the Nazis. And my father taught me, and my grandfather, by the way, and uncle were on the ship, the Exodus. My father said, you have no rights unless you enforce them. So to say that, you have a right to the First Amendment, you have the right to observe your religion, you have the right to these rules specified at the law school for you. To say that you have those rights, but not to enforce them, means you have no rights at all. So what I would say to others is what my father said to me. You have no rights when you enforce them. It's not easy to try to enforce rights. It's not easy to go up against those in the positions of authority. But when those in the position of authority are abusing your rights, the alternatives are either to resist or to succumb. Don't succumb.
Thank you, Professor. Always amazing insight. We appreciate you coming on Conduit and hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much. I look forward to being with you all again soon.